Conservative Voices Silenced. I'm Christine Sposato, and I'm excited to be your guide through the stories that matter. Stories of resilience, strength, and triumph in a world that doesn't always make space for conservative voices.
And I'm Elizabeth Smith, joining Christine in this journey. We know how it feels when your beliefs seem to be drowned out by the noise, but here on this podcast, we're turning up the volume.
That's right, Elizabeth, and we're creating a space where conservative voices can speak their truths, sharing the challenges they've faced and the victories they've celebrated.
Conservative Voices Silenced is not just a podcast, it's a movement that recognizes the diversity within conservatism and gives a platform to those who felt marginalized.
So whether you're a conservative looking for reliable stories or someone curious about the experiences of those with differing viewpoints, you're in the right place.
Get ready for an engaging ride as we dive into the trials and triumphs of conservatives navigating a progressive world. We invite you to join us on this journey of discovery, understanding, and most importantly, amplifying voices that deserve to be heard.
This is Conservative Voices Silenced, where silence ends and the conversation begins.
Good morning.
Hello, Elizabeth. Before I introduce our guest today, I just want to remind our audience that for some of our guests coming on our show, this is a big risk to go public with their stories. We're talking about transgender today, and that is obvious why that could be risky to someone, but some of our other guests and other topics. So we just ask that people respect that. And from time to time, we might not use people's real names or locations just to protect their identity. And I think that we need to be reminded to really respect the risks that they take and the bravery and strength that it requires to come public with a lot of their stories. And now I want to introduce Michelle. Michelle is a 34-year-old dog trainer, a California native who now lives in the UK with her fiance, and a detransitioner who struggled with gender dysphoria since she was a small child. She began gradually transitioning as a teenager after being introduced to the concept of transgenderism online, and later decided to detransition at 28. In the years since, she's gone through many stages of realization, acceptance, and recovery from her experiences. And she's now ready to share her story in the hopes of helping others who are struggling with the concepts presented by gender ideology. Let's bring on Michelle.
Okay.
Good morning, Michelle. Thank you so much for being with us. It's nice to have you here.
Yes, thank you.
My pleasure to come.
Well, we've been talking a little bit about some studies that have been done on children and trans and the trans process. And I think we should just dive in and hear your experience and your story and what happened to you. You started as a teenager, right?
Yeah, so I was first introduced to the concept of being transgender when I was about 15. So that'd be back in 2005. It was starting to become known on the internet, but it wasn't really something that I had encountered in my actual real present life.
And how did you find out about it?
So I was on a bunch of different online forums. There was one that I was particularly partial to because they had these cute little anime style avatars that you could dress up with different accessories and stuff. And for some reason, I found it really cute and appealing to take a boy avatar and dress it up in like girly outfits, prom dresses and things like that. And as a result, I started making friends with other users that had similar kind of gender bending avatars. And that led to me joining a discussion group on that website that was, oh, my dog's in the background.
That's
Wants
okay.
to say
Mine
hi.
usually are too.
Yeah. He's very friendly and curious. Hopefully he'll be quiet
He's
though.
welcome. Yeah, he's welcome.
Yeah, that's Malcolm. He's my best buddy.
All right.
So joined this discussion group for, I don't remember if it was exactly labeled as being transgender, but it was about, like exploring gender or something along those lines. And a lot of the members in that group were transgender or identified as transgender. And some of them were kids my age, 13, 14, 15, 16. Some of them were adults in their 20s and 30s. And because it's a discussion group, you're encouraged to share all about yourself and tell, how you feel and all those kinds of things. So I started to tell them that, ever since I was 3 or 4 years old, I wished that I was a boy. All my friends were boys. I always wanted to do the boy things. I was upset that I couldn't join the Boy Scouts and I couldn't play on the boys' football team, and, was always ditching my, frilly dresses and, things like that. Wanted to cut my hair short. And the response that I got from that was overwhelmingly that these signs all point to you actually being a boy inside, even if no one else can see it on the outside. So I just kind of accepted that at face value. I was 15. It made sense to me. I never like hated the color pink or, anything like that, but I just didn't fit in with the girls. And being, kind of I did have friends, but I was always, one of those weird nerdy kids and picked on and everything. So having an explanation for why I didn't fit in and why I was so envious of my brothers and all these different things just kind of at the time seemed like a perfect explanation for the experiences I'd had up to that point.
So it was very affirming to have a category or a label or a explanation for your feelings that were different seemingly than the norm of girls.
Yeah, and it was kind of funny because my mom, when she was growing up, she was a bit of a tomboy as well. She played basketball in school because she was tall. She grew up in the woods, so climbing trees and all that kind of thing were, second nature to her. And when I first started to express these thoughts to her, she just kind of went, well, it's okay to be a tomboy. You can be female and be the way you are. That's not a problem. Mm-hmm. But this is also at the time when
glad you're talking, you mentioned Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera, because I just over this weekend, I saw I assume it was a YouTube video I saw somewhere that they were talking about how gender, it was being normalized, and they showed a scene of a concert or something where Madonna and Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera came out and did this like wedding thing and were kissing, mm-hmm. and they were normalizing these different gender roles for youth. It was definitely for youth. It wasn't for 80-year-old women, and
so
it's interesting
I vividly remember
brought
watching
up that
it.
pop culture So
Mhm.
I don't want to diverge us too far, but from your story, but can you just quickly kind of just talk about how pop culture was influential for you?
Well, so I didn't grow up with cable TV or anything, but I certainly bought, all the teen magazines. I'd go to friends' houses to watch MTV. Um, I was like starting to explore rock music and stuff, separate from my
Mhm.
parents' taste. Um, and a few years prior to the transgender revelation, um, Avril Lavigne had come on the scene. And she was like,
Mhm.
and so she was just so different from, your average pop star. Um,
Mhm.
that, that kind of at that time gave me someone to look up to that was closer to how I was on my own. Um, but, that the pop punk thing started to kind of fall out of favor, and I felt a lot of pressure to, be hyper feminine, and I never learned how to curl my hair or do my makeup properly or any of those things. It just felt so alien to me. And my mom, she's quite feminine, and she just didn't really have the time to show me any of those things. And I don't really think I would have especially embraced it even if she had.
Right.
So, the pop culture thing was basically, this is what it means to be a girl. And it means everything sparkly and low-rise jeans, and,
Yeah.
none of those things felt good to me. So when I was given this alternative that, I could be a boy, I just thought, that's it. That's what I've got to do. And, there was some self-esteem stuff involved too, because at that age, I really didn't think that I was very pretty. And when I look back on those photos now and stuff, I'm like, really, I was too hard on myself. But I thought, well, I'm not a pretty girl, but I bet I could be a pretty good looking guy. And, you know, as I got more um, time to spend on the internet and I talked to more people online, um, that was the overwhelming message that I was getting, was that, you know, this is what this all means. There are these treatments. At that time, they were quite difficult to get. The bar actually, Malcolm, no, go on. He's being a hound dog. At the time, you had to live as your desired gender for 1 year while you were in therapy. Then your therapist had to write 1 or 2 letters of recommendation to an endocrinologist. And then if your blood work and all your medical stats were about, within certain tolerance, then you could get prescribed hormones.
And around what
Uh,
year was that?
so this was between 2005 and 2007 in California.
Okay.
Um, and so, I was warned by my online community that it was going to be a process to get these treatments. I might even get denied the first time, but that these are the talking points that I should use when I'm with the doctor to make sure that I have the best chance of getting hormones. So it took a while to convince my mom to even allow the consultation, because she just kept telling me, you can be the most masculine woman in the world, and that's completely fine, and that's what I want you to do. But I did convince her to buy me a compression vest, a chest binder, and I basically lived in it, which ended up causing a lot of health problems down the line, but it didn't show up for a while. So she finally agreed to let me do the consultation. And I was actually denied. I had had some traumatic experiences as a child, and so the therapist and the endocrinologist both said, we kind of consider that a red flag. We want you to go through trauma therapy, and you can come back in a few years, and maybe we'll reconsider. So that's how the system used to work. And if it was still working that way, I probably never would have been given hormones. Because what ended up happening was that I gradually became more vocal to. So they came up with, lots of different reasons and theories about why this was bad or impossible.
Did
So
that
anytime.
influence you at all? Did your friends influence you when they were questioning it?
In some ways, I was used to, being bullied and picked on and things like that by my peers. So I had somewhat of a shell built up against that. It was pretty difficult for most people to tell me that I should or shouldn't do something. But it was definitely painful to feel like they were rejecting me. Started to insist that people use my, male name and, refer to me as he and him and all of that. It wasn't actually until I was about 21 that I had finally really just told people, like, if you can't respect my identity, then you can't be in my life. So that was when, my mom finally capitulated. So yeah, at 21, I made an ultimatum. I said, you can accept that I'm a man, or you can leave me alone. And I don't think I really lost any friends or anything initially. Some of them I kind of lost touch with gradually, but there was no outright rejection. And at this time, it was becoming much more of a topic of conversation. So not everyone, but, people in my college classes, some of my younger coworkers, they kind of knew, what the etiquette was, and that they should, just accept me no matter what I said, basically. So I lived socially transitioned from 21 to 25. And I think it was a year or so, maybe 2 years before that. So this would have been 2014, 2015, I think. I should have written down
Well, I need a timeline for just like a week. So you're doing great.
Well, and I'm almost 5 years since I detransitioned now. So I've had a lot of time to think about it. So it's pretty well organized in my head at this point. But so about 2015, the laws and standard medical practices for prescribing hormones were changing. And by that time, I had moved to Denver. And a trans friend of mine reached out to me online and said, "Oh, I've got great news. you can just go to Planned Parenthood and they will prescribe you hormones. All you've got to do is sign their consent forms. So I went to Planned Parenthood. I told them what I was there for. They had all the forms ready with, what are your pronouns and all that kind of thing. And they gave me it was 2 sheets, double-sided, of the potential side effects for off-label use of testosterone. And it had a little disclaimer on there that this is an off-label use, so it may or may not be covered by my insurance, and so on and so forth. And there was some good and accurate information. I would later learn that it was not at all an exhaustive list, and many of the worst potential side effects were left off it completely. But I sat down with a nurse practitioner for about 20, maybe 30 minutes and explained that, I've always wanted to be a boy. I started transitioning around 17, 18, and I just wasn't able to get hormones until now. And she wrote me the prescription on the spot.
Not even a doctor or a psychologist, a nurse practitioner.
Yes. And that ended up being quite scary in the long run, because I actually only took testosterone for, I think, just over 3 years. And during that time, I started to have pretty concerning medical problems. My blood pressure was extremely high. I was diagnosed with hypertension. I was starting to experience some mild vaginal and urethral atrophy, which they just gave me insertable birth control to counteract that.
So now you're on 2 different kinds of hormones?
Yeah. And what they told me, because I said, I've been on the testosterone for a while, it doesn't seem to be doing any of the things that I want it to do. I wasn't really growing facial hair. It had some subtle changes. My hairline slightly changed. The texture of my skin slightly changed. My body fat was redistributing. But I wasn't, growing the beard that I hoped I was going to grow and all these things.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked, the nurse practitioner at the time, and she was the same one who treated me the whole time. I said, isn't it going to slow or reduce the effects of the testosterone even further if I take birth control? And she said, well, it's such a small amount that it shouldn't have a huge impact. And my actual blood testosterone levels, because I did have to have blood tests every 3 months, they were outrageously high, even higher than most biological men.
Wow.
And it still, wasn't having any dramatic physical effects on me. It was having a lot of emotional and psychological effects on me, though.
Mm-hmm.
The one good emotional side effect was that the anxiety that I had experienced prior to that virtually disappeared, and it never returned. But
Michelle, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I heard an interview with someone else who had detransitioned, and she said that on testosterone, she felt the best she'd ever felt in her life. She said she felt powerful and focused And it was almost like a high. It was just kind of amazing, like this superhuman feeling that she had never felt as just
Mhm.
a woman before she had transitioned. So I was curious about that, how these emotional effects or psychological effects were for you.
So there was definitely a lot of that. There were some drawbacks too. I did feel 20 times more confident. I went from being, a hyper organized planning type person to thinking that I could just wing anything. I could, build furniture without the instructions. I didn't need to ask anyone for directions ever. Whatever came my way, I could handle it. So that was fabulous. It also increased my libido unbelievably, which, my partner at the time was overjoyed about.
Huh?
um, so, and I definitely did feel a lot of energy and sense of vitality, and I was somewhat physically stronger. I didn't get massive muscle growth or anything, despite working out to try to achieve that. But I was definitely physically stronger as well.
Okay.
But the downside is that I went from being a very calm, even-tempered, rational person to having a very, very short temper. I would, storm out of a room, shout at someone, throw something. I developed a really serious temper. And I also, for the most part, lost the ability to cry for a while. I think in that 3 years, I probably cried maybe 4 times, despite often feeling like I wanted to and like that would be cathartic to be able to cry. Instead, what would happen is that I would have feelings that weren't necessarily anger to begin with that I now felt at a loss to express, and they became subverted into anger. So, and I still have a lot of male friends, and they tell me that this is, a real thing that they deal with as well, is that sometimes they feel like they wish they could cry, and instead they just get pissed off because the tears actually won't come. So it was definitely, there was some good, some bad. Once the hypertension got severe enough, the nurse practitioner told me that she would not refill my testosterone prescription unless I agreed to take a blood pressure medication. And she said, you don't have to decide today, but, go home and think about it and call me. So I went home and I thought about it, and I thought, well, I don't know if I'm going to be able to afford top surgery or, any further procedures anytime soon. If I do, I will definitely be a lifelong medical patient. If I continue on testosterone, I'm going to be a lifelong medical patient. And I'm not really a fan of doctors and needles and medicine. I've kind of got a phobia. So the idea of continuing to do that and take more medication in order to continue it just kind of broke the scenario for me. I realized that I'd really rather just stay away from doctors forever, and that if all I had to do to fix my blood pressure was to stop taking testosterone, then I would do that. So I called the NP the next week and told her my decision. She said, that's perfectly fine. I'll make a note in your chart. We'll have a follow-up appointment in a few weeks, so you can have another blood test to see how your hormones and cholesterol and stuff are doing. So I had exactly one more appointment at Planned Parenthood, I think it was about 8 weeks after that phone call. My testosterone levels were still high in the male range. During that time, I'd been weaning myself off of testosterone slowly. So I was using a topical skin gel to apply to take it. And so I went from doing, one dose every day to like every other day, every third day, once a week, and then I stopped. And so even though at that point I'd been stopped for about 2 weeks or so, I think the scale, I can't remember exactly the right jargon for it, but, when I was taking it daily, my score was somewhere around like 1200, which like the average man is like between 600 and 1000. After I'd stopped taking it completely for 2 weeks, I was still testing around 700. During that time, socially, I'd kind of shared with a couple of my friends that, I had to stop taking testosterone, and I wasn't sure what that meant regarding my transition. But this really strange thing started to happen where everybody that was so supportive of me transitioning started to tell me that even without the testosterone or any surgery, that I was just as much of a man as a biological male. And that just didn't make any sense to me. So I started to realize that really the whole time since I was a teenager, I really was a man, or just as much of a man, was not real. It was a delusion, and people were gaslighting me. My boss at work, my teachers at school, everyone had been gaslighting me the entire time. And that was a real low point, realizing that not only had I been deceiving myself, but I had been actively deceived by the people closest to me, by my doctors, by the people that should have just told me the truth, which is that I'm 5'6" and 120 pounds, and I'm never going to be anything like a man at all.
Right.
Yeah.
And then
And you never felt like a man inside. You talked about some of that emotional stuff, but your identity, you always knew you were a girl that was transitioning. Is that correct?
I think at the times when I was the most chronically online and the most divorced from my actual self, at those times, I did actually think that I was a man inside.
Okay.
I'm not going to go so far as to say I was, because I don't believe that's actually possible. But I was convinced that it was true. And so then there was this moment that I just really knew it was all falling apart and I had to stop, was that I'd been off of testosterone for a little while. I was still publicly identifying as trans. And I was invited by some friends who were drag queens to perform in a drag show with them as a drag queen. And that seemed kind of fun and novel because, I'd never worn high heels. I didn't know how to do my makeup, all those things. So the idea of pretending to be a woman for a night and doing the things that I had never experienced sounded like a great idea. So I did drag queen style makeup. I wore this blonde wig with, pigtails, and my drag number on stage. Seen videos of it after the fact. It wasn't too bad as a performance goes. But the weird part was afterwards, being in the dressing room, because all my drag queen friends are all gay males. And so we're all there in the dressing room changing clothes. And even though they're my friends, I'm apart from them. You know, they're not hugging on me and complimenting me and flirting with me the way that they are with each other. And I realized that I just had no business being in that space at all. I wasn't a gay man. I had nothing in common with them. They knew they had nothing in common with me. They wanted me to feel good and feel like I could participate, but they knew I wasn't one of them. They'd never been confused about it. And so that was when, you know, the illusion just completely shattered and there was no going back. So within, you know, probably 2 weeks of that, I made a very low-key, carefully worded announcement on my Facebook page where I just said, you know, this isn't a comment about anyone else transitioning. You know, I still support the trans community, but for my own health and well-being, I need to detransition. So, you know, I don't really care about what pronouns people use. At the time, I still continued using the male name I'd chosen for several years after that, mainly because almost everyone I knew at that time I had met with that name. And the idea of going through trying to convince everyone to call me something else again was daunting. So I didn't. And overnight, I lost the majority of my social circle. And most of them didn't say anything about it. They just unfriended me or blocked me or never invited me anywhere again.
So when they claimed to support everyone discovering their own identity, they did not support you finding your
absolutely not.
true identity.
And I even had a few outliers. There are 2 people that I knew at the beginning of the journey back in California that to this day, they still say that I actually am transgender and that I just was scared back into the closet. And so even though I've gone back to my given name and everything, like they still use the other name, you know, still refer to me as he.
Wow.
So that was very strange. And then I did also have a couple people that, you know, to my face called me a traitor or said that I was making trans people look bad. You know, probably 50 friends in my city to 5.
Wow. What strikes me is the narrative that you know we hear all the time is that this is supposed to be a positive mental health process for people, and it's supposed to you know, anyone that's at risk, anyone that has any mental health issues is supposed to like align them, and then their life is going to be like smooth. And what I'm hearing is there's a lot of trauma.
Oh yeah,
a lot of trauma.
I mean, it took me a good while to realize it, but I was in a cult. I was in an online leaderless cult. And I was encouraged to have nothing to do with anyone that did anything other than support me and encourage me. I was encouraged to disassociate from my body. I was encouraged to do things that, you know, I still have high blood pressure after 5 years. And it's better than it was. I don't have to be medicated for it. But it's probably never going to go back to normal. And it's not just the social community aspect of it that's cult-like either. It's also the medical community, because after I told Planned Parenthood that I was detransitioning, they told me I couldn't come back. They said that if I needed family planning services, that I would be welcome, but that they would not see or treat me or advise me in any way about detransitioning.
I'm wondering if you're comfortable talking about the spiritual aspects of this process for you. Not just because you use the buzzword cult, but our spiritual self is the core of who we are. And so I'm wondering how that changed and transitioned throughout this process for you, and where you have landed with it now.
Well, so I'm not highly religious, in a religious household. My mom is devoutly Catholic. My father is a non-denominational Baptist Christian. I went to church with both of them. I attended Bible study up until I was, 14 or so. And it just never really affected me one way or another. My parents weren't very aggressive about making me perform any religious ceremonies or anything like that, so I was never baptized because they made it my choice. But despite never really jiving with Christianity specifically, I have always known that I have a soul. That's never been a point of contention for me. So, during the transitioning process, part of my belief system was that my soul was male. Now I'm not sure I really believe that the soul has any gender. I think it's just a deeper, more ephemeral essence. Coming to that conclusion was really helpful because it allowed me to enjoy being a woman without feeling like that means I need to be hyper feminine. I'm still very much a tomboy. Don't get me wrong, I like to wear long acrylic nails sometimes, things like that. I've picked up on some things that, work for me. I've taken quite well to being a housewife these last couple years. I actually find a lot of fulfillment in that. But, actually understanding that the core of my being, my soul, has intrinsic connection to my body was a big part of the healing for me. Because everything from the beginning of transitioning to the decision to detransition was about rejecting my body. And people don't really realize how damaging that is, because when you first start transitioning, you think that what's happening is that you're allowing or forcing your body to conform to who you are inside. But what it actually is it's active harm and abuse of the body and a disconnection from the body. And, the people out there who say that they've transitioned and they no longer feel dysphoria, that's either because they are so dissociated from themselves that it doesn't matter to them anymore, or they're lying. Because, unfortunately, every single cell has your DNA that says that you're male or female, and nothing will ever change it. I've known so many trans people over the years, in person and online, and every single one of them, if I've caught them at a vulnerable moment, they will admit that despite however externally successful their transition appears to be, the things that they focus on are the things that they can't change. Their bone structure, the tone of their voice,
Hmm.
the fact that they didn't grow up as the opposite sex, so their way of behaving and thinking about things will never be that way. Those are the things that trouble them the most.
Michelle, do you think that, what you have just said in the last few minutes, it's so profound. My brain is just spinning trying to process it. I'm trying to catch up. There was so much in that.
Okay.
And what I'm wondering is, if that message was posed, or that question was posed to these children, what you were talking about, because I think everyone knows they have a soul. And yes, they become disassociated, and yes, all these other things can distract us and shift us. But at our core, we know that we have a connection with our Creator and with our soul. And, what you're saying is something that I have never really thought about in that way, that we are connected to our body and we're connected to every cell. Because I've never had that juxtaposition to question that or experience that. And that's why my husband, but I'm wondering if that is something that is so deep that would connect with children more than all the cognitive stuff, in people's heads. Is this right? Is this wrong? Should you dress this way or that way? What should be your pronouns? That's all really up here in your head. And what you're saying is so deep, and such this deep cosmic connection that, so back to my question. My question was, see, I'm processing out loud and, burning up our time. I'm sorry. But, do you think that if someone had said that to you when you were 15 or 16 or 17, would that have caused a different thought process or awareness for you?
I've never actually asked myself that before. At that time, it was really difficult to challenge me about those things. But yeah, I think that would have been much more effective than explaining the genetics. Because while that part's important, and it did give me some moments of doubt, what has actually brought me back to myself is focusing on the connection between my body and my soul. And, I give advice in a Facebook group for parents that are concerned about their kids being affected by gender ideology. And one of the things I tell them is, find a way for your child to connect to their own body. And, without getting too new age hippie, because I'm not at all, that can be something like yoga, where your body and your breath and your spirit are working together to achieve physical and mental and emotional harmony. That was a huge part for me in coming back, was finding that sense of alignment. So yeah, I think especially, kids know whether they've been to church or not.
Yeah.
They know that there's a part of them that is bigger than their bodies. And teaching them how to understand the connection between that soul and their bodies would probably be tremendously restorative.
Right. Wow. That is so inspirational. Wow. I'm sort of speechless. That doesn't happen often.
I'm trying to come up with questions, and I'm like, I got nothing. I'm just listening. I'm sorry, you're not going to hear me on this podcast, guys, because I'm listening.
Well, that was one of the reasons I decided to do it, is that, so I'm part of a few different support groups for detransitioners online. And the biggest group is 40,000 members. Wow. Now, not all of them are detransitioners. About half of them are. The other half are concerned parents and people who are still currently transitioning that are having doubts and are reconsidering. So there's a lot more of us than anyone even dares to count, frankly, because the organizations that track transitioning don't follow up with anyone who's detransitioned. So they say it's 1%. That's absolutely untrue.
Right.
But it's really difficult to come out and talk about it publicly because it's really personal. It's really embarrassing to go through this process of telling everyone that you're actually the opposite sex and trying so hard to convince them, and then realizing that that was never the case at all, and now you want to, that they still believe in gender ideology. They still believe that some people really are trans and that they're just not one of them. I don't believe that at all. For the hundreds and thousands of trans people that I've interacted with face to face and online, I don't believe a single one of them is truly trans. There are a lot of different reasons why they think they are, but I don't believe it's a real thing. I think it's sexism and homophobia and fetishism in a lot of cases. But I don't think anyone is really transgender.
Well, I some of the research that I have been talking about and did before our interview says that of the I've just looked up children, not adults, but that few go back immediately to cisgender or their and their original gender. Most who retransition or detransition will identify as non-binary. Yeah, because that's probably a safe, comfortable place to land. That the things that you're talking about of having to face people and the world in a different way. To say non-binary is
Well, I mean, I considered adopting that label myself for a short time because I knew that I was going to be looked upon as a traitor, and I was going to lose a lot of friends, and people weren't going to listen to me when I spoke about my experience. So from a purely pragmatic standpoint, at 28 years old, I was considering identifying as non-binary so that I would still have a platform publicly and socially. The other bonus to being non-binary is that it is whatever you want it to be. You have no social expectations, no gender roles. There's nothing that you have to do. You just get to be however you want. And, over the years, my view about gender roles has evolved. And I've come to the conclusion that generally they're good and useful, but that they're not something that we should require a strict adherence to, because that's where a lot of this starts, is kids aren't the big bad football player or the dainty ballerina, and so they go, well, what am I then? Am I even a man? Am I even a woman? And so it's good to recognize that women are built a certain way and they tend to be good at certain things. Not all of them, but they tend to have certain strengths and weaknesses, just as men have certain strengths and weaknesses. And that if you slightly deviate from that cookie cutter, that's perfectly okay. It doesn't change that you're still male or female. And that is one thing that I say a lot, I wish I had heard more of. Not so much just from my mother, because she was the one person saying it all the time. But I was going through my teenage rebellion, so she was the last person I wanted to hear it from. What I wanted was for the media and my peer group to tell me that being a tomboy was good and acceptable, and that I didn't have to change.
Yep. Well, my own daughter, I have a son and a daughter. My son is 2 years older than my daughter, and she worshipped him when they were, kids. And she went through this stage about 9 or 10, I don't know, the middle of elementary school, and he was going into middle school, and she would only wear his hand-me-down clothes. Unless it was Easter or something, and she would comply with pigtails or braids and a frilly dress. But she went through this boy stage for 3 or 4 years, where all she would wear were her brother's clothes. And I looked at that as her processing through him growing up and leaving her behind. Because he was in this middle school thing where he started being a tough guy and would only hang out with his cool boy, friends. And it was like this whole thing where I think she was, I mean, I don't know if I should use the word grieving, but it was a transition. And so she was really identifying with him and their close relationship. And I just let it go. I didn't care. I just let her do her thing. And I just thought, she's going to grow out of this. So whatever, she's a kid. What do I care? Had that happened today, I can't imagine the pressure I would have been under by the school system, by, the peer group of other parents, of other people, and on her to say, why are you wearing your brother's clothes? Why are you walking around looking like a boy? And what the heck? By the time she was a junior in high school, I don't want to say she looked like a pole dancer, but she was fully female, expressing her femininity completely. In fact, she told me the other day, she said she had gone back to her high school to a football game, was comparing the way girls dress now to how they dressed at football games. And she said, Mom, why did you let me dress like that? They were, and anyway, I guess my point is the ripple effects of this for individuals and families, and how that could have affected her life if she had been grown up now and not have been able to just go through that stage. And what they say is, let kids express themselves. That's what I did. I let her express herself. She wasn't hurting anybody as far as I was concerned. But I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that, but it's terrifying.
I think when I was a kid in the 90s and early 2000s, it was common for girls, especially as they're approaching puberty, to kind of reject, girly things.
Mm-hmm.
And I had other friends, not many, because, 95% of my friends were boys, but the friends that I had that were girls, they were tomboys. And I was just the only one in the group that had enough internet access to get dragged into this whole ideological concept.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of them had two parents at home. And so there was enough supervision and guidance and role modeling there that they didn't fall for it.
Mm-hmm.
And, then years later, I also learned I was diagnosed as autistic. And that was a big eye opener because I am so socially awkward. I cannot, I can't instinctively tell if someone has my best interest in mind. And so when I had adults online and doctors and professors all telling me that this was good for me, I went, of course these people want what's best for me. In previous generations, no one made much of a fuss about it. Or maybe they, complained a little bit, but you were just kind of allowed to get on with it for yourself. And that's what happened with my mom. And my mom is like, gorgeous blonde, looks like a model, you'd never guess that at 15 she was playing basketball and had a bowl cut. No one would have thought that looking at her now. But that's such a normal thing for girls to go through. And, especially with this rapid onset gender dysphoria thing.
Yes.
Because all these girls, they're the same ones that they're autistic, or they've got an eating disorder, or they're self-harming, and they latch on to this idea that transitioning is what's going to fix everything. And their parents are desperate because their parents are terrified of everything. They're receiving all this messaging from schools and, television. And so everyone just rubber stamps it. Living in the UK now, some of the people in my detransition group, they can't actually get proper healthcare at all because the NHS won't take them on for anything that's related to their transition treatments. They've got to go to the gender clinic. But the gender clinic won't treat them either because they're no longer trans. So they have to go and pay for private medical care and not even disclose their transition history until after they've gotten the test done.
Well, I have a study here from oh, come on, Chris. This is the Canadian Medical Association Journal. And here it states, studies have also suggested that youth with gender dysphoria are overrepresented in at-risk populations.
Yeah.
So
That's
they know it.
Right. Yeah.
They know it, but they are not even addressing it. And
they've probably known it for 15 years on a statistically significant basis. They've probably known.
Right. And in the conclusion, they say best management will continue to evolve as new research emerges.
That would be great if they allowed you to do the research.
Oh my gosh.
But that's, the
and
best
in the
research
meantime,
now,
they're churning out, people who aren't professionally, in my opinion, trained, educated, prepared. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, yeah. So, the best research that is going to come out, that's still in the works, is going to be from Sweden, because they've already stopped prescribing puberty blockers and they're delaying transition treatments until adulthood. So they will be the ones that will have the reliable information, because they're doing their own internal research, and what it showed them was scary enough that they said, we're not going to go along with this anymore. In the UK and the US and Canada, it's a lot harder because they don't want to fund your research unless you've already guaranteed them that it's going to be a pro-gender ideology conclusion. And the few academics that have the means or the courage to actually go and do proper research, they get censured by the organizations that they work for. Gosh, I'm blanking on his name right now, but he does a really good interview on Chris Williamson's podcast about, he did a paper on rapid onset gender dysphoria, and showing that 70% of the people going to gender clinics are teenage girls that have comorbid conditions, whether it's eating disorders or autism or whatever. And his paper has been disavowed by the organization that he works for. And if you go to read it online now, you can still read through it, but they've got a big stamp across every page of it that says that it's been, retracted, or I forget the exact term for it. Something I should have written down for this ahead of time is this guy's study.
Well, I have seen articles when I was looking, doing some research, that have, something was published and then there's what you're describing is not a redaction, but saying, oh, we're correcting this now.
Yeah.
But I have one here that is the Journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics, study. And here's they have acknowledgments. Underneath it is funding. Let's see. It's been supported by the National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation grant, Arcus Foundation grant, National Science Foundation GRP grant, financial support from the MacArthur Foundation. So we all know that the breadcrumbs lead to the funding. To support what you're saying is that these organizations, this other study that I was looking at, can I find it right now? Who funded it?
I think the Heritage Foundation published something a couple years ago, and I tried to show it to people because I'm convinced at this point that gender ideology is actually just evil. So anyone who will listen to me, I try to explain to them how and why that is. And all of them just went, but it's from the Heritage Foundation. They're right wing. They're biased.
Exactly.
And it's like, they're the only ones that are even looking. You've at least got to read the thing.
Right. This one study that is cited everywhere. I've found it in the New York Times, People, all these publications. It's the same study that's cited. And it was the Trans Youth Project that funded the study that's being cited in all of these publications. So it's all coming from one study that's being funded by one organization that is very pro-trans. And I agree with you. I appreciate you saying that out loud, that it's evil. And, also, as I always say about most everything, follow the money.
Oh, yeah.
And well, I mean, that's evil too.
Just do the basic math, right? So my testosterone prescription was $400 a month.
Wow.
Over a period of 3 years, that's several $1,000s.
Yeah.
They would have made probably nearly $100,000 if I'd started by the time I was a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
The surgeries cost between $30,000 and $100,000.
Mm-hmm.
And then they need revisions to the surgeries because they're experimental. And, so you're talking about millions, if not billions of dollars
in this industry.
Yeah. I mean, that's why, so in the UK, there isn't a proper right-wing political party. The right-wing party, the Conservative Party, they're just as lefty as, the SNP and Labour and the Greens and all of them. And I used to be really frustrated by that when I first came over because I was like, you don't have anyone that thinks that 65% income tax is too high, No, they don't. They also all support gender ideology across the board. Look, I'm going to say that I think you're a man in a dress. Like, I'm just going to say what I think. But in terms of policy, they're all in favor of it. And the reason is because they're all elites that make money off of the pharmaceutical industry. They have a vested interest in continuing to fund gender clinics. They closed the Tavistock clinic, I think in 2022. But all they did was create one in every county. They just dispersed it instead of making it one center, which from the whistleblowers that have come out who've worked at Tavistock and the things that they say, I imagine having the same thing going on in 40 different towns isn't going to improve the situation at all.
Right. Wow. Before we close, I wanted you to address parents specifically and resources for them. And, I don't know if you disclose these groups or if they're private groups, so you're not having trolls and crazy people. But whatever you can share that would be helpful.
Well, there is a group in particular that is open to parents.
Okay.
I can't give you the exact name of it right now. It's on Facebook. I will send you a message when we're done, and you can put it in your show notes, or if you want to record a little clip for it or something.
Right.
Because there is a support group where detransitioners are sharing with parents, and some of us have even had conversations with the kids. If everybody feels comfortable with that, obviously we try to be very sensitive and.
Oh, wow. I know that when we talked before, you said that this experience was just so intense, and you've been processing through it, that it's not really work that you want to be dedicating your life to, because as a human being, you're still working through the trauma of it and the transition of it. But what we were talking about earlier, the whole like soul and spiritual thing and stuff. I have never heard anyone say that in that really profound way before. And I'm not a student of trans, but I've been, I've watched some stuff, some interviews, and read some stuff. Amazingly strong, and you're just amazing. My point is just that I am wondering if at some point that could be something that could be a calling for you, or some way for you to contribute to this movement, anti-movement, because your experience and your way of putting it is so unique and so profound. So I'm just throwing the seed out there. I'm just saying that was really amazing.
I'm torn about it because, my conscience tells me that I need to share with people, that they're not going to hear the things that I can tell them from anywhere else. And also because of the length of time and the level of involvement that I had with the community, I know so much more about it than even a lot of the, so-called experts. So, it's something that probably every other year I say, I'm going to write a book about it.
Yeah. Okay. Are we back?
Yeah.
Think so?
Are we all here? Okay.
So as I was saying, like the drawback is that it's really labor intensive, and I've got other goals. I'm trying to emigrate to this country permanently or semi-permanently. And also I only have so much emotional bandwidth to live in that all the time. So, it's something where if there was a way for me to turn it on when I'm ready to turn it on and turn it off when I can turn it off, and it not be an everyday, endeavor, I would definitely do it. And that, this is the first step in that direction, I guess.
I think so.
Because, to even something like just running a Substack and getting enough people to read it, like it requires so much constant input, and you've got to work the algorithm and, all of that. So that's daunting. And while it's no longer extremely painful to talk about these things, it still requires a lot of mental heavy lifting. So, I'm at this point, I'm not going to promise anything. What I do that I can do in small bursts now is I give advice to parents that are concerned.
Wow.
And that's easy for me to just, pop in, write a couple paragraphs in response to somebody's question, and then turn it off and do something else. Going back to the resources for parents, one thing I did want to mention is there's a book called Lost in Transnation by Miriam Grossman. She's a medical doctor. She is one of the most experienced psychiatrists when it comes to gender and treating patients with gender dysphoria. And she's come to many of the same conclusions that I have, that this is, other forms of trauma and mental health issues that have become transmuted into, the gender ideology thing. So for anybody who has young kids and they want to know how to protect them, or they've got, teenagers that they're going through this struggle right now, it's the best source of information that I can recommend. She's also done some podcast interviews and stuff if you just want a bite-sized crash course. She's been on Trigonometry. I think she's been on Jordan Peterson's podcast. And something that is crucial to helping kids that are being affected by this is accepting that it is a cult. And the thing that people always say is that It's not a cult because cults have a leader. That's not always true. If you look at the BITE model of what cult behavior looks like, gender ideology fits like 90% or more of the criteria. And so the best thing that you can do for kids that are being exposed to this is, to whatever extent you're able and is reasonable to remove them from it completely, you should. If you're able to take them out of the public school where everyone introduces their pronouns, do it. If they are in an after-school program where they're saying, hey kids, let's talk about gender, get them out of it. Switch them to something else. Try to restrict their access to social media. I know that that's like a really tough ask, especially for teenagers, because all their friends are on it and they know they're missing out. But it will sneak in there in insidious ways that you can't even imagine. And then also encourage them to do something physical, whether it's going for a run with them, horseback riding, martial arts class, Boy Scouts, anything that gets them physically connected with themselves. Because when they actually are connecting with their bodies and they appreciate what their bodies are capable of, it's much harder to view your body as the enemy. So that's just my little,
very wise,
bullet points there is get them away from gender ideology as much as you can socially. Keep them off the internet as much as you can and get them physically active. And, if you're a spiritual or religious family, definitely talk to them about what their soul actually is, how it connects to their bodies. That's a key piece of the puzzle as well.
Yeah. Amazing, Michelle. Thank you so much for your time. Elizabeth, did you have any other questions before we close?
Well, now that you guys can hear me.
Yeah.
I don't know what that was, but it's fine. Well, to say what you said earlier, one of my sons had actually, when he was 4, he put my daughter's pink dress in. My daughter is younger than him, and it did barely fit. It was so tight on him. I thought we were going to have to cut it off, but he wore her dress, and I sent my husband a picture, and he's like, "Why is he wearing that?" I said, "Because he's 4, and his sister was just wearing it." So it happened one day. And now he's in martial arts. He goes to the shooting range with my husband. He rides his ATV. He helps me with the chickens and the ducks. So that one day, I can only imagine if he had been at the age, because he's 8 now, almost 9, if he had been older and had been, in school where it was being pushed and stuff, that he would be a completely different kid right now. And I am so grateful that I didn't freak out about that one day, that I didn't say, you're 4, you want to wear your sister's dress? We'll see if we can get you out of it.
Well, and honestly, like, I have a friend here that her son is an adult now. He's my age. And he's gay and he does perform drag. And when he was a toddler, he was always stealing her heels, stealing her lipstick, all that kind of stuff. And she had no idea what to do about it. She asked his pediatrician, and she said, when he's at home, let him do whatever he wants. But when he's out in public, you've got to protect him because people are not going to know how to react to a boy wearing a princess dress, And he grew up to be very healthy and happy and is so glad that he didn't ever get confused as being transgender. So, when it comes to things like playing dress up, like let your kid use their imagination. Just, feel free to let them play. That does not mean that you need to send them to school that way. It does not mean that you need to tell them that, they're your daughter or son now instead. Kids have imaginations and using them is good for them. It's also a good means to teach them the difference between fantasy and reality. Is, yeah, let's all have a pretty princess party where we all dress up in, big fluffy dresses and, have a good time. Oh, wasn't that so fun to pretend to be princesses? You can absolutely embrace your child's whims and creativity without making it a life-altering decision. So, honestly, well done. Just let them explore, and don't,
Yep.
because when I was a bit younger, when I was in junior high, I wore a different costume to school every day. I was in theater, so I wore, a pirate's outfit. I went to school dressed as a mime, all these different things. It's totally normal to want to play and make believe, there's nothing wrong with that. So, the idea that, your son or daughter has to do only these activities and can't do these activities, like that's where I think, we can take gender roles too far. Is like they're kids. Just, your son can play with a Barbie, your daughter can play with a fire truck, those things are totally fine. That it doesn't mean that they're the opposite sex. And most of them, by the time they've come out of puberty, they're going to be, the boys are going to be more masculine and the girls are going to be more feminine. And some of them won't. Some of them will just stay, being the opposite. And that's also okay. But, going through these treatments that are going to sterilize them and require lifelong medical care, like that's not the answer.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for your time. This has just been such a wealth of information and guidance. And thank you for the advice for parents. More than anything, I hope that parents out there are able to connect with those resources, listen to your advice, and help guide their students. I know it's a hard decision to make, but I concur. Get your kids out of all of that indoctrination and put them in places that are safe, where they're going to be able to develop normally and discover who they are.
Absolutely. And I also, you asked me a question when we spoke before that I wanted to touch on really quickly is, are these kids at risk of committing suicide? Right? Because that's the emotional blackmail that's used to coerce parents into accepting the treatments, even if they don't actually think it's a good idea. If your child is self-harming or is suicidal, that is a separate mental health condition that has nothing to do with gender dysphoria. They need to be treated for self-harm and suicidality. They do not need hormones and surgery. Denying them those things until they're an adult is absolutely not going to increase their risk of suicide if you address the underlying issues. If you just say,
so common sense.
Yeah, I know. But you wouldn't believe, if you've seen that Matt Walsh documentary, What is a Woman? And he's, talking to this gender specialist, and he's saying, well, chickens clearly know if they're a hen or a rooster. What do we think about the hen that suddenly wants to be a rooster? And she goes, do chickens cry? Do chickens commit suicide? And you're like, you're not even living on this planet, first of all. But also, your child is actually so much more likely to hurt themselves if you tell them that they're likely to do it than if you actually intervene. So, for the kids that have underlying mental health issues, like address that. And preferably don't go to somebody that specializes in gender affirming anything. I know that's hard to find these days, but I think actually in that book that I mentioned, Lost in Transnation, Miriam Grossman has a list of therapists all over the
Wow.
country that have not caved to the affirmation model. And I know, you know, this is also another instance where a spiritual community, you know, a church leader, someone like that can really be of use, because so often the root of those type of problems is not feeling a sense of purpose. And that's where a lot of people can build and grow a sense of purpose. So, you know, do get them help if they're really depressed or they're hurting themselves, but do not think that that means that they really are transgender. And can you hear me?
I just came across a woman who was in the LGBTQ community and lived as a lesbian, who is trying to support people spiritually who are choosing not to live that lifestyle. And her name is Kim Zember, Zember, and she has a lot of resources as well. She wrote a book. Anyways, is building a supportive community that is spiritually based. Oh. Michelle, I can't thank you enough. This has been so profoundly insightful, educational, inspirational, and you are one of the most, you know, not just articulate and intelligent and all those things, which you absolutely are, but you know, you are inspiring and so strong. And perhaps because of all your searching, you know, you have such a seemingly great connection with yourself. And for any of us, trans or not, that is really something that, you know, we aspire to, is to understand ourselves so well and to be so grounded in that. So thank you for sharing that with us. Really appreciate it. We'll be in touch. And, you know, I would love to talk to you more about your future projects as they evolve in time.
I'll definitely keep you posted, and I will send you that that group as well, so you can put it out there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Michelle. Your time has been
just
really invaluable. So have a great rest of your day.
You too.
All right, bye.
Bye.